One. Aurangzeb Khan, welcome to Build Sell Radio.
Great to be here, John. Thank you for including us.
Yeah, no, you are a four-time entrepreneur. How did you get the idea for Altia? What was the genesis for this product?
You know, back in 2012, when we raised Series A, we built the plan in 2011. We were experimenting with immersive video experiences. Video conferencing is one use case. AR and VR is another use case. And you can think of so many things now with AI, self-driving cars and so on, that need to bring in a lot of visual information. And pretty much everybody before us had done it, and even today are doing it primarily using a single camera with an ultra-wide-angle lens or a fisheye lens.
Yeah.
Those devices have very well-known limitations in terms of the level of distortion. You look like in a fishbowl, like distortion, scale distortion, objects looks like getting pulled and so on. We felt that the right approach was to invent a whole new class of technology for synchronizing, stitching, and optimizing a multi-camera array.
Who's the we at this point? So it's not just you in your garage. There's a group of you that started this company?
There is. We were three folks that had background and also deep background in imaging science, in the semiconductors used for digital imaging and imaging signal pipeline. And then I had done earlier work in my first startup for building the graphics chip for the Sony PlayStation 2. We built several steppings of that chip, and also a chip for a video supercomputer used for movie making.
So you are like a tech guru. Like, you are deep. I was even looking at your bio before we started. It was like you have like 5 degrees. I was trying to figure out where all the places you went to school, and I'm like, oh yeah, I think it was Stanford and Berkeley, and there were a lot of letters after your name.
Well, thank you. I just, I'm a slow learner, so I had to do it many
times. Okay, so you built this, you had this idea that video cameras, if I can dumb it down, were not providing a great experience for all of the use cases.
Right.
And you had this idea that if you were to provide a more panoramic view, that it would provide what you refer to as kind of immersive meaning you feel like you're there more.
That's right.
Is that it?
That's exactly it. And I think, just to kind of, so right now we're having a one-on-one conversation, and we need, a single camera is just about the right field of view. But imagine you had 1 or 2 more folks on your side, and I had 1 or 2 more folks on my side, right? Pretty much you start bobbing and weaving trying to get 2 people in, or you get really uncomfortably close to each other.
Yeah.
That's not a good experience. And we felt that, our eyes give us about 180.
Yeah.
And when we talk to people or talk to a group, we instinctively engage with that group by reading the room, reading the group, seeing, who's engaged, who's lost, how to present and talk and so on. And I thought that was very weird that cameras really, hundreds of years being around had just given us this tunnel view of the world.
And are you like a tinkerer? Do you get in and actually like to play with the technology, the lenses of the camera, the aperture, and so forth? Or are you the money guy who raises the money, sells the idea, and then hires the guru?
A little bit of both, right? So, growing up, I had my own dark room. I did a lot of work with cameras. I was not a good photographer, but I was certainly an amateur photographer, right? And then, of course, growing up in the Valley, which has been a phenomenal place to build a career and work in, did a lot of work with high-performance video. And actually, in our case, the challenge for real-time communications is even more difficult because it's real-time. So if it takes much more than a few hundred milliseconds for me to get to you and back, it doesn't feel like a real-time conversation. So the bar we had set was very high, which is to create a real-time synchronization stitching technology so we can take any size array of cameras and create any sized field of view.
Love it. So who are the other 2 founders? What are their names, and what?
Asif Sarvari, he was a guy who built imaging chips earlier, and Lars Hurlitz. Lars had built an encoder chip, had sold his previous company, and had built what's called an H.264 encoder chip. When you have a lot of video data, you sometimes compress it to send it out, and then H.264 was the popular standard.
You've been involved in a lot of startups, and I wonder, were you tempted to do this without your 2 co-founders? Meaning, were you ever tempted to say, enough of the co-founders, the other shareholders, the nonsense of getting everybody together, maybe I'll just do this one on my own?
No, I was going to say, so personal belief, right? Engineering is one of those, it's a team sport, and I'm very lucky. We built a phenomenal team. And like any great team, we didn't try to build. In fact, in the beginning, we deliberately tried to keep the team very small. but kind of handpick each person. And the nice thing when you build a company is, you can give everybody a stake in the deal. And that just aligns everybody, right? We're all in the same boat. We're all rowing together. We either all win or nobody wins.
So they were shareholders in the company.
Oh, everybody in our company is a stockholder. As soon as they join, they have, options that vest over time. But basically, they have a stake in the deal.
One of the questions I always wonder if founders' philosophy too is how big a financial stake would a rank and file, not a founder, but a kind of a air quotes rank and filed employee get in terms of options? Like, is it the kind of thing where if the options were to be successful and you were to have the exit you were hoping for, that an employee might earn, for example, 1 year's salary or 2 years' salary? Like, is there any sort of benchmarks that you would help, give
Yes.
other entrepreneurs? Yeah.
That's great. So my kind of belief, and you mentioned this earlier, is that, I'm fine to have a small piece of a big pie other than the whole pie, right? Because, and if you make it, so we've definitely built the company with the idea of a venture scale business. We knew, and you were seeing evidence around us, Zoom has had a phenomenal IPO. They were a Gartner Cool vendor in 2014. We won that in 2015. Hundreds of companies are using us together. So we were lucky or prescient to see this wave for huddle rooms coming up and how people work now, how modern video collaboration works. And we felt that there'd be plenty of wealth creation to happen. I just wanted to make sure we brought the right team with the right depth of knowledge and expertise and kind of the right attitude to work well together.
And how do you avoid them always sort of asking, how's our valuation and when are you going to sell? And,
in fact, we didn't have a plan to sell, so we'll get to that, I'm sure. But, the valuation, of course, we were also, and again, it's kind of your DNA as a company, right? So our DNA has been to be very open and very transparent. So once somebody is in, they really are in. They know all the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I find that that's actually very powerful when you work with highly motivated, self-directed people who want to win. If you give them good information and you lead by example, you work at least as hard as everybody else around you, it just builds a healthy culture, right? So our culture was to let our product and let our software do the talking, not, market ourselves so much as just let the product get out there and show what it could do.
Got it. So it certainly did get out there and won a lot of support early by raising an initial venture capital round. Maybe talk a little bit about what that was like to raise your first kind of tranche of money. And in particular, I'd be curious, I think a lot of listeners would be, answering that same, is it better to open up, get a big piece of 100% of a small pie or a small piece of a big pie? Yeah. Maybe we could talk a little bit about your philosophy on when it makes sense to raise money and maybe some thoughts around how you go about raising money.
Yeah, two things, and I've kind of tried to be consistent on this. One is to be very frugal in terms of cash burn. I'll talk about that hopefully a little later here. But to answer your question, I was fortunate to have been an entrepreneur earlier and knew some of the folks in the Valley who'd done well. Some had done phenomenally well. So they wanted to invest. They invest in Series A or seed stage. We didn't do a seed stage. We just did a Series A. We raised $3.5 million from a handful of folks who, had just done well and were aware of and fine with taking, risky investments like a new venture.
And this is basically on your reputation at this point. You're not a big business plan per se.
No, actually, we had a business plan. We had a value prop and a vision. We said that with the growth of the cloud and the scalability through, companies like Amazon and so on, services like the one we're using, Zoom would flourish and emerge, and that millennials naturally were doing text and video and not phone calls. And so we saw that as that workforce came forward, distance would kind of get annihilated by great bandwidth and these kinds of technologies, right? I mean, you are in Canada, I'm here in the Valley, and I literally pitch to all over the world sitting right here, and it's a very normal thing now. 10, 12 years ago, it was not that common. You could see it could happen. It wasn't that common. So we raised it based on a very solid business plan. It had risk, and we were very open about the risk. We also had technical risk, and we showed how the team members we brought in, the first 10 people, could nail those risks.
And you had no product at this point. You didn't have a physical camera to point to.
We had prototypes. So again, having been done it once before, I took about a year actually with the, off and spent time kind of prototyping some stuff ourselves. Very crude, but enough to kind of show that it worked. Naveed Alam was another early guy, Yash Gupta. So we had this technology, we could showcase it. It was crude, but it kind of showed that it could be done. That the really hard problem we needed to solve was how do you synchronize and stitch and optimize video from cameras in real time. And we've built now, I think, the world's fastest stitching pipeline. It's a 5 millisecond stitch, and to calibrate you, a blink of an eye is about 150 milliseconds.
Wow.
It's pretty fast. And it's so fast that it can actually be used for, all kinds of applications like self-driving cars, and so on. So it's been a great platform technology.
So you raise this money, and I'm always curious, how do you put a valuation on the business where it's just a prototype and a couple of guys working on an idea?
It's a negotiation, right? And and so there are some benchmark metrics in the Valley. And of course, we're lucky that I knew other founders and so you had some ranges, but we ended up, I think we had a 10 million valuation, and we raised about 3.5 at that first stage.
Got it. So
and then we did 2 more rounds after that, but still, a very frugal deal. We raised about 10.5 at Series B, and at that point, very happy and very fortunate that Intel Capital came in. They are a phenomenally successful investor, very tech savvy, and getting them to invest is actually a high bar. But if you kind of surpass that bar, it also expands your horizon as an enterprise grade company, and that actually helped us also in customer outreach. And then did another about a 10 million round after that.
Got it. So Intel being the Intel Capital being the division of the chip maker that invests in technology companies. Okay, and they kind of gave you the good housekeeping seal of approval that, hey, if Intel Capital's in, then this must be.
That's how it was viewed, I think, in the market, right? And then of course they also were connected to like the Fortune 2000 worldwide, and so they could help us just get introductions and get connected once we had a product, right? So we brought out a first product, we won lots of awards with it, put ourselves on the map. Got about 400 companies starting to buy the product. And then the second gen product, Panacast 2, we ended up with 1,600 companies, from Fortune 5 through startups, all using the product because it was unique and it solved a hard problem at the right moment in time.
And what's the distribution strategy? I mean, I was doing a bit of research before the interview, and as I shared with you before we started, I Googled it and I found it on Amazon, the Jabra Panacast 3, and I sent it to our IT person saying, hey, we should get these for our office.
Thank you for doing that, yeah.
But is that how people buy them on Amazon, or are they buying them?
So what happened is in the beginning, we were selling, directly, and then over the last 4 years, we started to build out a network of distributors and resellers. And a lot of them actually came to us because end customers, major corporations were saying, I want to buy this product. And so they heard about us, I think in the best way, which is from end customer demand. And we were always out on the road, evangelizing, demoing, pitching, showcasing, and just trying to build that flywheel of demand outside in.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the last year, we went essentially all through the channel.
So who would be a typical channel partner of yours then?
So Stampede and Starin are the 2 in the US.
I don't know
there's AVT in Australia, NEC in Japan. So there's just a range of them that are specialist distributors in AV technology. And then of course, back in 2017, we started pioneering using the same array as a set of AI sensors to create data. And that opened up an ecosystem. We opened up an API so other people could write software on our processor, and it opened up an ecosystem of companies now using it to not only have a great audio video experience, but also use for it to generate information.
Okay, so I want to see how the cash moves. So I'm going to pick a company out of the air. Procter & Gamble calls you up and says, Aurangzeb, this is great technology. We want it for all of our boardrooms.
Yeah.
They would not buy it directly from you. They would go through an AV distributor, someone who they
actually typically they would buy it through a reseller.
Okay.
The reseller who's like a specialist AV reseller, and then the reseller would procure it from the distributor.
Okay.
So would sell to the distributor, and then they would feed the supply chain.
And when do you get paid? How would you guys get the money from that sale from Procter & Gamble?
We just typically actually got paid the discounted amount at which we sold it to the distributor.
I see.
And the
Okay.
distributor made some margin, and then the reseller made some margin, and so the final transaction happened between the, let's say, P&G in this example, and the reseller.
But distributors are notorious for stringing out OEM manufacturers and paying slowly. How did you deal with that cash flow kind of gap?
Yes, that's exactly. And so, in fact, for a startup, that's a pretty serious consideration. So part of the criteria we used was timely payments and sort of, reference checks and some conversations with their exec management to say, look, we are a startup and we live on a very thin cash balance sheet. And so the cash burn and cash flow is important to us. And we were fortunate that, the product moved quickly. So I think also distributors, if they find that a product moves quickly, then they have confidence that their capital won't get tied up for a long time.
Got it. And so when you took that original Series A, what did you say? It was $3.5 million at a $10 million valuation. A lot of people say the moment you take out, outside capital, you are in essence building to sell. You have to get a shareholder return for the people that have invested you. So you lose the luxury of building a lifestyle business or building a forever, legacy business. You are going down, the train is going down the track. Do you share that view?
I would say certainly when people invest in you, then, I very strongly felt the obligation that, look, they've invested, then they deserve a great return. And so does the team, right? I mean, people are working. We all took pay cuts. We were working for relatively low salaries, but with a big equity stake, right? And so the only win is if the equity goes through a liquidity event, and it turns out to be, in many cases, a life-changing event, right?
How big a pay cut did you take on a percentage basis? Would you relative to your market rate, air quotes?
Mine was big. I mean, so it's sort of like I took the biggest and then others took less, but mine was 50%.
50%. So you figured if you were the CEO of another company, you're basically earning half of that as the CEO of Altia.
Half at the base level, and then actually even less because typically those deals, the total comp had, MBO components and other things, RSU, so I didn't have any of that. But I had a big stake in my company, and so if it succeeded, it would be a great outcome, and it has been.
What advice would you give other entrepreneurs who are dealing with investors for the first time? I know you've done it through many startups, so this is old hat for you, but they've raised their first tranche of outside money, maybe it's $1 million or $2 million, and they're just dealing for the first time with outside investors. What advice would you?
One thing, and it's really crucial, is when you raise the money, make sure you have raised enough money to achieve a meaningful milestone. Because, the whole valuation cycle then says, okay, if you build the first product, you get the first sort of customers, you get the first $1 million in revenue. There are a handful of metrics that maybe you negotiate them up front, but you generally need to know. And sometimes people don't raise enough money, or they have unprecedented things happen that they hadn't thought about, that they kind of just burn through the money or get very close to the edge. And then it's a very difficult negotiation, right? Because you're on the back foot, you're in a much weaker position. So we tried to raise a meaningful amount of money that we could get to that milestone. And as you said earlier, we had a track record that allowed us to have a more equitable value discussion, right? To not give up as much.
I've heard of this thing called a down round, where essentially you're going and you're raising money in what is essentially a lower valuation.
Lower valuation, right? Or sometimes people give up more than half the company at Series A. Mm-hmm. So we actually were kind of on the best case outcome of that. And the reason being is we had shown a track record of building companies and achieving outstanding value. And of course, the market opportunity, to your question, we were building a venture scale company. So those are the companies I like to build, not meant to be a family lifestyle type company, but meant to be a company that can really accelerate out. And that's where Intel Capital and folks of that standing, or any of the Sandhill VCs here, those are the kind of companies they would like to invest in, right? So indeed, if you want to build a company that is a family lifestyle company or a legacy company, that's a fantastic kind of company to build, but then the funding cycle is different and the way you grow it is different.
And so if the aspiration is to attract money from a Sandhill venture capital firm or the likes of Intel Capital, what is the bar for someone like that to invest? What are they looking for? It sounds like it's a much higher bar than the Series A sort of friends and family.
It is. I think, the expectations range depending on if they come at Series A, B, or C. And But I think, on the asymptote on the low end side is they want to make sure they get their money back, that it's not a total write-off. On the high side, it can be a 10x multiplier, right? So anywhere between that 1 and 10, and typically, 2 to 7 is a more typical range, but anywhere between 1 to 10, some are even more than 10 times returned, right? So those, but the general expectation is that it's a multiple of the amount invested, many multiples preferably. And then the horizon typically is, 7 years is actually a fairly average number. That's kind of our span. 5, it could be 5. Some companies now actually are more like 10. So, 7 is a pretty typical kind of a number.
And in your case, you started this back in 14?
2012. We released the first round in 2012. And so 2019 March, 2018, we had the deal. So roughly, 6.5, 7 years.
Great. So let's get into the deal itself. You at one point you raised a Series C, I think you called it, which was at a $78 million valuation.
That's right. The Series C was valued at 78, and then G and Jabra came in and did just a preemptive offer at 125 million.
Got it. So how many employees did you guys have at that stage when you got the $125 million offer?
We were 22 employees.
So that's going to be mind-blowing for a lot of people to hear, right? So like for some people to think that you sold a 22 employee company for $125 million is kind of mind-blowing.
Really? Yeah. It's not that crazy for high tech, but I guess I'll accept that.
It's pretty mind-blowing. What is that per employee? I mean, in terms of valuation, it's a lot. It's about $6 million of value per employee.
A little more, yeah. And, but just to calibrate you, the folks were...
Is that a nice way of saying get your head out of your ass? Is that
no, it's...
calibrate me.
highly accomplished individuals on the team, and then products in the market that were generating, we grew revenue 4x over a 3-year period, and 1,600 customers around the world, 40 countries, and the top brands. I mean, Zoomtopia, we had a story out with Uber, Zoom, and us, how we enabled Uber to use Panacast and Zoom for global. I mean, they operate in hundreds of cities around the world with our product, right? And 30 filed patents, 15 issued patents.
How important was the protection of the IP, the patents, and so forth in the overall valuation?
I think the fact that we had solved a hard problem, and that and many companies are trying to solve this problem, and there's so many smart people, they will, but we were just ahead and we'd done it first, and that we had the patents to then protect our core IP, right? And also a way to scale it forward. Now we are on our 3rd commercial generation of products in about 6 years. So moving very fast, innovating, leading the industry in our space, even compared to the very big players. And of course, yes, the IP was very important. And the fact that I think Renee, the leadership at GN, at Jabra, really could see how combined, because they had built a phenomenal expertise in audio and in audio AI, and we were doing video and video AI, and it was like these two trains running on parallel tracks, and you could easily see how combining them. That's the other thing, by the way, the complementarity of fit was very powerful, right? Sometimes, as companies come together to save like 10% cost. This isn't one of those. This is like really a chance to be, 1 + 1 could be 10, because you're just reaching that much deeper and higher into the opportunity.
Yeah, that's what I want to get into next. So what was it? So the offer was from GN Audio, as I understand it, which is a division of a larger company called GN. Maybe describe what GN does and why they saw you as strategic.
Yes. So GN itself actually is a storied company. It's celebrated the 150th anniversary this year. Very, very successful early Danish company. And the founder of that company, laid telegraph cables through Russia and China and all through Hong Kong. So phenomenally far-reaching impact and pioneering founder and team. And so they've always been company of that longevity, of course, reinvents itself and looks at new opportunities. They had built a phenomenal business in audio products, particularly from our interest, enterprise-grade products. And actually, they've been also winning a lot of market share for consumer. So both companies have won CES Innovation Awards, for example. They had a really nice product launch this year.
CES being the Consumer Electronics Show. Would I have heard of anything? Like, do they have any headsets that they've heard?
Yes, exactly. Okay. Very well-known headsets, noise canceling headsets for communications.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Market opportunity they recognize is that when we all now work in open offices, it's hard for people to sometimes concentrate because of the general level of sound around you. So with a headset and with noise canceling, you're like in your own private space as a knowledge worker, you can concentrate, right? Well, we saw the other side of that, which is that in those same open offices, people are building hundreds of tiny conference rooms, 3, 4, 5-person conference rooms. And the architecture of these rooms is really different than old style video conferencing. They are for practical everyday work and they are in use constantly. If you go to an Uber or to an Indeed, they literally are constantly in use. And that's just how people work, right? Like how you and I are talking, this is a normal way for people to work now. And so we concentrated on this opportunity and they realized that these are very much a complementary set of capabilities and a market expansion opportunity. And so did we. We had a strong engineering team. 90% of the company is engineering, but a relatively very weak sales and marketing. Two folks in sales, one in marketing. So we needed help. We needed help on that side.
I love it. But GN had a big stable of sales and marketing folks.
Yes.
And did they sell through the same channel that you did, meaning the audio visual?
Yeah. So in addition to having deep engineering expertise in audio, then they had this complementarity in terms of sales and marketing capacity. Same channel, exactly right. Some augmentation with the specialist channels for AV, but largely the same. And a lot of depth in manufacturing, right? And so when we wanted to scale business, and the nice thing with the manufacturing depth is it also, just when you buy more volume, you get a better deal. So it could help with reducing cost in the product.
So there was some cost savings as well. So you guys are 20 employees, some great, customers and Indeed and Uber and so forth. Were you on the road? I may have missed this earlier, but were you on the sort of road to an IPO when GN made their preemptive offer?
So we were actually searching for a partner to build. There's a new class of product coming out where basically, customers wanted products that are combining the video capability with audio. So imagine our device has microphones and input, then you want speakers and you have a whole solution, right? And so, and then of course, we had a particular view about how AI would improve that experience. Like, when I'm talking to you right now, I'm on a Panacast, you're not seeing the 180, you're seeing a reduced view because I have a capability in this device that detects me as a person, doesn't know me by identity, but knows that there's a person and just frames the shot, reduces the field of view automatically. So these kinds of things were, a big improvement to the user experience. And they were similarly making improvements. They had invested in a company in Germany using AI to automatically adapt the audio experience. Mm-hmm. We both felt like we had an alignment on the vision. We had an alignment on the market opportunity.
Got it. And so you were looking for a partner to help with the manufacturing and
design, product design. Yeah.
And how did the acquisition come up? Did they pull you aside and say, "Hey, how would you feel about if we bought you?" Or did they
pretty early? That's it. And we had maybe been fortunate. We had other companies approach us earlier, and we were actually not going down that road. But what happens, and it was definitely the case here, is when I met the team and I met the key folks, I flew out to Copenhagen. I was going to Europe for some customer meetings, so I just took a day, flew up. And I felt very good about the cultural fit and about the complementarity and about the alignment of the vision, right? So, because then you have to say, look, I'm going to be here and I'm going to be trying to, I've got commitments to my investors, but also to my team and to myself. And is it an environment where we can all flourish and see that big multiplier? And so we did. But to answer your question, yeah, they broached it very early on. Soon as I think they figured out, okay, the technology is sound and market leading, and that we can build leadership products, then they broached it very early.
And then where did it go from there? Did they say, well, what do you want for the company? And
No, no. So I brought it back to my board, right? I mean, as you said,
brought what back? Just you said like just their interest? Did they actually give you a letter of intent, or what was
the interest, and like, did we want to open the door?
okay?
Because I was going to go, I had raised about 27 million. And so for me, the next thing was to go do a big round, like a 30 million round.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as you said, put us on the road towards an IPO. And that probably would have taken another 3 years, maybe more. Right. And so because I had investors, and investors had a big stake, and they'd been with us for, 6 years, the normal governance process kicks in. And so I brought it to the board and I said, look, and so then the board set some parameters around the conversation.
What does that mean?
I'm sorry.
What do you mean by they set some
just some ideas. Okay, well, what is the minimum valuation that would be acceptable? For example, we talked about getting an investment banker in, and we actually did bring an investment banker in to facilitate the conversation, because the GN folks had an investment banker, and then there was some other interest out there potentially. And so then, an investment banker did what they do, which is that they tried to scope the market out and see if this was the right deal and the best deal.
And so they got sort of they checked temperature with other companies other than GN, and yes. I'm assuming that the GN offer continued to be the best.
They did. They were very purposeful and decisive in their action, and also the strategy. And then I'm sure there's like this whole strategy to negotiation, right? So they moved quickly, which then preempts, in a sense, opening the door too wide to too many people.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a smart strategic move, I would say, on the GN part. And and the reason we opened the door and we moved forward was that the DNA and the fit felt right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, knock on wood, that's continued to be true. We just had a big launch in Monaco last week, and at Infocom for the Jabra Panacast, which is built from Panacast 3, from a third gen product, but with a new very high volume manufacturing pipeline behind it.
That's great. So the offer, I'm curious to know, so the board said, look, Aurangzeb, this is the bottom line. Like, if you're going to enter into these conversations, this is the minimum number. We've just put in money. We've got to see an appreciation for that money that you had a valuation of 78 million. So clearly they're looking for an increase in the investment they've made. So they give you a number. At any point, do you share that number with GN and say, look, guys, it's got to be this or more?
No, we didn't need to. Conceivably you could do that, but I think they, again, being quite sophisticated. They've had acquisitions in the past and a very sophisticated M&A team on their side. I'm sure in fact, I found out obviously now, they built a very sophisticated model about the company, what they thought the financials looked like. They asked us for our financials. They actually went through an incredibly deep and exhaustive diligence process. Everything, from being outside experts, looking at the technology, looking on the financials, and so had a pretty good sense. But before they did all that, they made a preemptive bid, and I think they had done enough homework that the bid was a strong bid, right? It met the board's expectation. It wasn't going to be, some companies try to do this at the lowest kind of price, and then they kind of grind on, and typically it's, I would say, it's generally not a good outcome, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas I think the GN folks could clearly see that, hey, if this asset comes in, there's a market that is at least 10 times bigger behind it that we can together access. And the whole video collaboration market is exploding, particularly this modern style of huddle room collaboration, right? And, you've seen, Zoom's had a phenomenal IPO. I think they're at 27 billion today. So there's a lot of opportunity in this space. Of course, they have an advantage being a SaaS provider. We're more of a device provider, but you need devices in all the rooms where the service is being delivered.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Was there any part of you that feared handing over the financials? Because we talked before we hit record, and I said, can we talk about how much revenue you guys had? And you said, no, that was never made public, so we can't. So, but I'm reading between the lines and saying 22 employees, it can't have been that much. Maybe it was. I don't need you to comment on that. But I guess what I'm going at is, And the reason I'm asking this is I'm imagining other founders, when asked for their financials, may get a bit squeamish and think, oh man, is this going to shoot myself in the foot if they see that I only have X amount of revenue or Y amount of profit?
Yeah.
Were you squeamish at all about, or a little hesitant?
So I mean, maybe say it this way. We showed, we actually had very good revenue for 22 people, because the product scales without people, right? Because I have a third. So I can get into large, multiple millions relatively quickly. The other thing that I could show was a very nice trajectory to the revenue growth.
Okay.
Right. And then the third part that certainly I focused on as a CEO was repeat business, recurring customers, because that's a level of validation about the product and its need, and that you're solving an important problem.
Mm-hmm.
They'll come back. We were a premium priced product. We were not, the low. I mean, you can buy $100 cameras. We were $995 for Panacast.
Yeah, I think it's over $1,000.
Yeah. So it was not, but it was delivering value. And the easy way we could explain the value was, in a huddle room, any device other than us, any conventional camera, would leave 2 out of the 5 people invisible. You could, if you had 5 seats in the room, you couldn't use 2. That's 40% real estate wasted. And like in San Francisco, $72 a square foot times 40 square feet wasted. You can do the math. It pays for itself very, very quickly. And people got that once you explained that. And then of course the whole AI roadmap. So we weren't hesitant about the revenue, and we didn't get, some companies get valued at 1x multiple of revenues. Sometimes they think it's a great outcome at 3x multiple of revenues. We were in excess of those numbers because of the market opportunity and because of the IP protection around the product.
Yep. And that makes sense. I love the fact that you were zeroing in on repeat customers. Yeah. Is that a data point that GN asked you for and you started to track it? Were you tracking it all along?
No, we were doing it all along. But interestingly, and this is like where you then start to find a resonance, right? Like, how do the folks think? They picked up on that, and they recognized the power of that, because they themselves are in that same mode that, customers stay loyal to the product and to the product portfolio for a long time.
Yeah. So a company like Uber would buy a half dozen, and they're like, "Wow, these are amazing," and they buy another 50, another 100, and
that's right. That's what was happening, is that there's a bit of a network effect, because we found that, and in fact they found also similarly, many customers found that once the customer participant on the remote side received the feed, they were like, "What is that? How are you doing that? How can you bring everybody in and they don't look like they're in a fishbowl, they look kind of normal," right? And so that helped us scale even faster.
How do you, it sounds like an amazing run, an amazing 7-year journey. At what point, how do you personally feel at this stage in your career, having sort of wrapped up and put a bow on this business? You sound like a startup guy. Is there another business plan in your back pocket? Are you on to the next?
Yeah. I definitely like doing startups. I mentor in the Technology Ventures program at Stanford, and I'm also a charter member for an organization of Pakistani entrepreneurs. I was born and raised in Pakistan, and also the Indus Entrepreneurs, which is Indian and Pakistani entrepreneurs who started that. So we spend a lot of time now. When I did my first startup, it was not that common, and we kind of just learned by doing. But now there's a network of people who help just voluntarily and freely, also as angel investors. So I'm definitely very active in that community. Mm-hmm. Because I find, as you probably know also, entrepreneurship creates new jobs and new opportunity and uplifts a whole country and a whole region and a whole economy in a very powerful way, right? So, and I was very, very fortunate to be in Silicon Valley, where I love working here with people from all over the world.
How did you get to Silicon Valley? What was your upbringing, and what landed you in the Valley?
Yeah, a bit of as you said, technical geek. I had a first-class first in Pakistan from one of the good schools in physics and mathematics. And Berkeley had this incredible pedigree in physics. So I came to study physics and actually ended up doing electrical engineering, computer sciences, and nuclear engineering. And semiconductors were just exploding around that time, right? So my core technical expertise was as a circuit designer and in building system on chip large-scale semiconductor devices. So I stayed with that for a very long time. I was at Tandem building the massively parallel computer systems that are used to run non-stop systems, Six Sigma available systems, running most of the world's banks and stock exchanges and so on. So really, and then pioneered system-on-chip devices for hard disks, for gaming consoles, things, networking equipment, like what Cisco produces, and just really have always maintained a deep technical knowledge. But then along the way, when I was at Stanford, first degree was EE, and then the second was a business degree, rather than a PhD, because I actually felt like I needed to learn more about how businesses are put together, and how do you build. And I attended a class at Stanford in the business school that I really enjoyed, which was just called entrepreneurship. And Professor Johnson, Pitt Johnson, he was one of the very early VCs. He started asset management. He'd give us these gigantic business plans and kind of just say, okay, analyze this and decide if you'd fund it. And then actually would bring in the founder and the CEO. And those companies in those days were like the star companies that had gone from being founded to being, multi-billion-dollar revenue-making companies. And so it just was an incredible eye-opener to say, these are real people who took risks, and they don't all work out, but in these cases, they did. And it was just a very, very inspiring experience.
What's been your biggest failure as an entrepreneur?
Couple of times, losing some of the key guys that I wanted to bring on board, not being able to get the right guys in at the time, and it delayed us in getting products out. I think looking back, and then certainly in the very beginning of our company, we took on more than building the device. We were building a full cloud service. We prototyped it, we built it, but realized after having done all that although technically that we could do it, and it was phenomenally exciting to do, we didn't have the funding to go kind of take that all on. So one of the cardinal rules in a startup, right, is, be laser focused on one thing and nail that, make sure it's worthwhile. So we kind of deviated from that. And, it cost us time and money, and we built that technology and it's still on the shelf. We haven't been able to commercialize it, maybe down the road. One thing with good technology is, if it doesn't go out right away, you just never know when there might be another moment in time when it can flourish. But, biting off too much, I would say, and then some of the team composition things in the beginning.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't sound like you did much wrong, because a $125 million exit in 7 years is it's a pretty good way to spend a few years of your life. Aurangzeb, I know we're going to have lots of requests for people to reach out to you. Can we point people, first of all, where do they buy the Panacast 3, the Jabra Panacast 3? Where do you want to point people to? Is there a website?
Yeah, they can go to panacast.com or jabra.com. And, one way or the other, just get back to us, and we would love to enable them and, see the product flourish. We're very passionate about transforming how people connect, and we think this will help.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And
also, by the way, and our distributors like Stampede and Starin, and there will be more being announced. So if you go to Stampede or Starin and their reseller subsystem, B&H carries it. There's AVI, SPL, Ford AV. There's a bunch of them out there. In the US and in Canada. And then if you're international, of course, there are local. So if you Google it, you'll typically find the local reseller.
The reseller, great. And the power of Google will get you to this product if interested. And I know we're going to have requests. Is there, on social media, do you accept LinkedIn connections? Do you have a Twitter feed? Are you on Instagram? What's the best way to reach you on social?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's sometimes bad because I'm traveling so much. So forgive me if I take too long to respond. But LinkedIn is awesome.
Okay.
And then we'll circle back.
And we'll put this in the show notes. And if you're watching on video, you can see Aurangzeb's the unique spelling of his name. It's Aurangzeb. Am I getting that correct, Aurangzeb?
Perfect. That's awesome. Thank you for getting the name right.
Well, listen, it's been a real pleasure, and thank you for your candor. And it's a great product, and I wish you all the best with it. It's great.
Thank you so much, John. Pleasure talking with you today.
All right. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Take care.